Everyone thought the twins were in danger. They didn't realize the maid was the one being hunted. By the time the first alarm failed to sound, the house was already compromised. The lake outside the Hardwick estate lay dark and still, reflecting nothing. Inside, the twins slept in separate cribs, breathing in the uneven rhythm that comes before a night turns wrong. Lenora Whitby stood near the nursery doorway, listening. She had worked in wealthy homes long enough to know when silence meant peace and when it meant something had been removed without permission. Downstairs, Elias Hardwick moved through the house, distracted and restless, trusting a security system he hadn't checked in months. Lenora noticed what he didn't: a back door that hadn't been forced, a light that didn't come on when it should have, a delay that lasted just long enough to feel intentional. Then she heard it, a voice low, calm from behind the glass doors. "Hands where we can see them." Lenora turned slowly, placing herself between the twins and the sound. She raised her hands, not because she was surrendering, but because she understood something the men already knew. This wasn't a robbery, and the twins weren't the reason they were here. Before we continue, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's dive back into the story. The lake beyond the Hardwick estate stretched black and still beneath the moonless sky, its surface reflecting nothing but darkness. Night had fallen with the kind of silence that pressed against the windows, thick and watching. Lenora moved through her routine with practiced precision. Doors locked. Windows latched. Nursery checked twice. It was a rhythm she'd built over months, one she trusted far more than the expensive security system Elias relied on. Technology failed. Instinct didn't. Orrin and Vaughn had refused to sleep separately again tonight. They lay curled together in one crib, their small hands intertwined, breathing in perfect sync. Both boys startled at sounds no one else seemed to hear: a creak in the hallway, wind against glass, the settling of old wood. Lenora understood that kind of alertness. She'd been born with it. She descended the main staircase, her footsteps muffled by Persian rugs worth more than most people's homes. Elias sat in his study, phone pressed to his ear, his voice clipped and corporate. When she paused at the doorway, he waved her off without looking up. "Just nerves, Lenora," he'd said earlier when she mentioned the unsettled feeling in her chest. "The house is secure. You worry too much." But worry had kept her alive more than once. She made her way to the kitchen, then stopped. The side gate, the one leading from the garden to the service entrance, stood slightly ajar. She'd checked it an hour ago, locked it herself. Her pulse quickened as she approached, examining the latch. It hadn't been forced open from the outside. It had been unlatched from the inside. Lenora's breath caught. She stepped back into the kitchen, scanning for anything else out of place. Her eyes landed on the nursery monitor, sitting on the counter. The screen showed both boys still sleeping. But something felt wrong. She climbed the stairs quickly, her hand gripping the banister. The nursery door was exactly as she'd left it, half open, nightlight glowing soft amber. But when she stepped inside, her gaze fell to the cream-colored rug beside the cribs, a tiny smear of mud. Fresh, nowhere near any door. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knelt down, touching the edge of the stain with her fingertip, still damp. Someone had been in this room, recently, while she was downstairs, while the boys were sleeping. Some people confuse quiet with safety until staying alert costs something. Peace that ignores warning signs is rarely peace, her grandmother used to say. Lenora rose slowly, her eyes sweeping every shadow. She returned to the side gate, forcing her hands steady as she relatched it, testing the lock twice. The garden beyond was empty, silent, too silent. Then she heard it, movement, deliberate, coming from where no one should be. The twins' eyes opened simultaneously, not with cries but with eerie precision, two pairs of wide, unblinking stares fixed toward the darkened hallway. Lenora froze mid-step, her hand still on the doorframe. Neither boy whimpered, neither reached for her. They simply watched something she couldn't see. "Orrin, Vaughn." Her voice came out softer than intended. The baby monitor on the dresser crackled once, then went completely silent. The small green light that indicated connection blinked off. Lenora's stomach dropped. She crossed the room in 3 strides, picking up the device and shaking it gently. Dead air. 5 seconds. 10. Then it flared back to life with a static hiss, the light resuming as if nothing had happened. Her breath steadied, but her grip on the monitor didn't loosen. She set it down carefully, turning back to the boys. They'd shifted their gaze now, still synchronized. Still unsettling, but at least they were looking at her. From somewhere deep within the walls came a sound. Low, muffled. A voice, perhaps, but not distinct enough to pinpoint. Not shouting, not calling out. Just there, present, where it shouldn't be. Lenora pressed her ear against the wall near the window. Nothing. She moved to the shared wall with the hallway. Silence. But she'd heard it. She was certain. Downstairs, Elias sat illuminated by the pale glow of his laptop screen, his jaw tight. The text had arrived 3 minutes ago, from a number not saved in his contacts, not attached to any name he recognized. Tonight fixes it. He'd stared at those 3 words longer than he should have. Deleted the message. Then immediately regretted it. His thumb hovered over the phone, debating whether to call his head of security or dismiss it as a wrong number. His eyes drifted to the security panel mounted beside his desk. Camera feeds displayed in neat squares. Driveway, garden, front entrance, side gate. Everything looked normal, but the timestamp in the corner lagged, just by a second or 2, but enough to notice. He refreshed the feed. The lag remained. The system was responding slower than it should. Elias leaned forward, typing rapidly to reboot the network. His fingers paused over the keyboard. Who had his private number? And what needed fixing tonight? Lenora knelt beside the cribs, humming the same low melody her grandmother used to sing, a wordless tune meant to calm restless spirits and anxious hearts. Oren's breathing began to slow, matching her rhythm. Then Vaughn's chest rose and fell in perfect sync, his tiny hand uncurling as if releasing tension he shouldn't yet understand. Vaughn mirrored her breathing exactly, not just settling, matching. Inhale for inhale. Exhale for exhale. She stopped humming. He stopped too, his eyes locking onto hers with unnerving awareness. A chill crawled up her spine. This was no longer just a feeling. Something was actively moving through this house. Then, without warning, the front lights cut out. The warm glow that had illuminated the circular driveway vanished, plunging the entire front of the estate into darkness. Lenora stood slowly, her heart pounding. The house held its breath. Lenora moved swiftly down the corridor toward the security room, her pulse still racing from the blackout. If the front lights had failed, she needed to see the full camera grid, needed to know if this was electrical or something worse. Her hand reached for the door handle. Locked. She blinked, trying again. The panel beside the door that usually responded to staff keycards now flashed red. Access restricted. Since when? Miss Lenora. She spun around. Caleb Morrow stood 3 feet away, hands clasped in front of him, his expression professionally neutral. Too neutral, and he'd appeared far too quickly for someone who should have been checking the perimeter. You need to return to the nursery, he said evenly. The twins shouldn't be left unattended during a system fluctuation. The system's down? Intermittent. We're running diagnostics. His tone was rehearsed, smooth. Best if you stay with the children until we've cleared the issue. Lenora studied his face. Caleb had been head of security for 8 months, efficient, distant, and always just slightly too controlled. She didn't trust people who never showed cracks. I can monitor from here while you... That won't be necessary. Elias's voice cut through from behind Caleb. He approached with his phone still in hand, his expression tired and irritated. Lenora, Caleb's right. Protocol says non-security personnel stay clear during technical malfunctions. Protocol. She repeated the word like it tasted wrong. Elias exhaled, softening slightly. I know you're concerned, but let the professionals handle this. The boys need you upstairs. She'd heard this before. Different employers, different estates, same script. Stay in your lane, do your job. Let us handle the rest. In her experience, procedure always protected everyone except the most replaceable person in the room. and she was always replaceable. Understood, Lenora said quietly, stepping back. Caleb nodded, already turning away. But as he moved past her toward the main hall, she caught it, his hand rising briefly to his ear, fingers brushing the small communication device tucked there. His lips moved, barely audible. Still on schedule, while claiming the systems were down. Lenora's chest tightened. If the radios were dead, he wouldn't be speaking into an earpiece. If the cameras were offline, he wouldn't need real-time updates. Her gaze flicked to the security panel visible through the narrow window beside the locked door. The feeds were live, timestamps running, but each one showed a 3 to 5 second delay from real time. Subtle enough to miss unless you were looking for it. The cameras weren't broken. They were being selectively delayed. Not every threat breaks in, her grandmother used to warn. Some are already inside. Lenora turned toward the staircase, her footsteps measured and obedient. But her mind was racing. Caleb didn't want her in that room. Elias didn't trust her instincts. And someone with access, with clearance, with control was manipulating what everyone else could see. She climbed the stairs slowly, her hand trailing along the banister. She was being kept away from answers on purpose. And that meant the answers mattered. Lenora had learned silence the hard way. 3 years ago, in a different house with different children, she'd spoken up, noticed discrepancies in the family's financial records left carelessly on a desk, mentioned them to the wrong person. Within a week, jewelry went missing. Within 2, she was accused. No proof, no trial, just a quiet termination and a reference that damned her with faint praise. She'd been the scapegoat because she'd been convenient. Since then, she'd kept her head down, her observations to herself, her instincts buried beneath compliance. But tonight, those instincts were screaming. She stood in the hallway outside Elias's study, the door slightly ajar. His voice drifted out strained, anxious, nothing like his usual corporate command. I don't care what the arrangement was. This isn't... He coughed, hard. This isn't what we agreed. A pause. Then another voice, crackling through speakerphone. Unfamiliar. Cold. The boys are leverage. She's the liability. Lenora's breath stopped. Handle her quietly, the voice continued. Before she becomes a problem. She, not the twins, her. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. This wasn't about kidnapping Oren and Vaughn. She was the target. The boys were just the excuse, the reason to have someone isolated, unprotected, easy to frame or disappear. She backed away from the door, her pulse roaring in her ears. Inside the study, Elias's voice slurred slightly. I don't feel. A thud. Something heavy hitting the floor. Lenora froze. She should check on him, should call for help. But the voice on that phone had been calm, too calm. Rehearsed. What she thought was a break-in had been rehearsed. Some people leave before they see how blame is prepared. She turned toward the stairs, her legs moving on autopilot. The twins. She had to get to the twins. Her mind raced through options, call the police, trigger the alarm, grab the boys and run. But who would believe her? A maid with a questionable reference against a billionaire's head of security? She'd be detained, questioned, blamed, and the boys would be left with whoever orchestrated this. Her chest tightened with the weight of it. Protecting the twins might require sacrificing herself. Staying meant becoming the scapegoat again, or worse. Running meant abandoning 2 children who had no one else paying attention. Lenora reached the nursery, her hands trembling as she checked the monitor. Both boys still sleeping. Still safe, for now. She moved to the panic room, a reinforced chamber built into the nursery's western wall, stocked with supplies and a separate communication line. She punched in her staff access code, the one Elias had given her during her first week. The keypad blinked red. Access denied. She tried again, slower this time, deliberate with each digit. Red. The panic room keypad rejected Lenora's code. Her knees nearly buckled. They'd locked her out, removed her access, isolated her from the one place designed to keep the vulnerable safe. She wasn't just the liability, she was the trap, and the door was already closing. Lenora moved backward through the great room, her arms wrapped protectively around Oren and Vaughn. Both boys were awake now, silent and wide-eyed, sensing the shift in her heartbeat. The tension coiled tight in her muscles. She'd snatched them from their cribs the moment she heard the first footstep on the marble below. The glass doors leading to the terrace reflected nothing but darkness and rain. Then the darkness moved. 3 figures materialized behind the glass, tall, deliberate, faces obscured by black masks. The center door handle turned slowly. Unlocked, they stepped inside without breaking it, without force, as if they'd been given a key. Lenora's breath caught, her feet rooted to the floor. "Hands up, Lenora." The voice was calm, almost polite. The man in the center tilted his head slightly, his posture relaxed, unbothered by the rain dripping from his jacket onto Elias's expensive rug. "This ends quietly." Lenora raised her hands slowly, palms open, surrendering not to them, but to keep the twins calm. Oren whimpered softly. Vaughn buried his face against her shoulder. She didn't look away from the masked men. "Don't hurt them," she whispered. "We're not here to hurt anyone." The man's tone didn't change. Reasonable. Measured. Wrong. A sound from the hallway stumbling. Uneven. Elias appeared in the doorway, gripping the frame for support. His face was pale, slicked with sweat, eyes unfocused. He tried to speak, but only managed a slurred syllable before his knees buckled. He caught himself. Barely. "Elias." Lenora started forward. "Stay where you are." The second masked man raised a hand, not threatening, just firm. Elias blinked hard, trying to focus. What is this?" The first man ignored him, his attention locked on Lenora. "We're not here for the boys, Lenora." He stepped closer, boots silent on the hardwood. "We're here for what you know." Her mind reeled. What she knew? She didn't know anything. She was just a photograph slid across the floor, stopping inches from her feet. She looked down. It was her, standing in this very room. Weeks ago. The angle suggested it had been taken from outside through those same glass doors. She was holding a tablet, her back to the camera, unaware she was being watched. The timestamp in the corner read 3 weeks prior. Her stomach dropped. "You've been in his files," the man continued, his voice still disturbingly calm. "You've seen the discrepancies, the offshore accounts, the names. I haven't." Her voice cracked. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You will." The third man finally spoke, his voice deeper. "When they ask you, this wasn't a robbery. This was a setup. They weren't here to steal. They were here to stage her guilt, to make her the insider, the accomplice, the one with motive and access, and a photograph proving she'd been snooping where she didn't belong." Lenora's heart hammered. If she called the police now, if she screamed, if she ran, the story was already written. Evidence planted. Witnesses primed. Calling the police would complete the frame. "Sometimes faith is born in terror," her grandmother had said once, during a storm that nearly drowned their village. "When nothing else can save you, you learn what you're made of." Lenora tightened her grip on the twins. She was about to find out. "Take me." Lenora's voice was steady, though her hands trembled against the twins' backs. "Whatever this is, whatever you need, take me. Let the boys go back upstairs. They don't understand any of this." The first masked man tilted his head, considering. The silence stretched unbearably. "Please." She swallowed hard. "They're babies. They won't remember. Just—" Oren's fingers curled tighter into her shirt. Vaughn shifted in her arms, his small voice breaking the tension with a single, devastating word. "Nora." It was barely a whisper. But the second masked man flinched. The leader's posture changed just slightly, a flicker of something human beneath the performance. He glanced at his companion, then back at Lenora. "Put them in the playpen," he said quietly. Slowly, Lenora moved toward the corner where the padded playpen sat, her legs shaking. She lowered Oren first, brushing her hand across his cheek. Then Vaughn, whose wide eyes never left her face. She wanted to say something, anything that might comfort them later. But words felt like lies now. "Lenora, don't." Elias's voice cracked from across the room. He tried to push himself upright, bracing against the wall. His legs gave out. He crumpled forward, hitting the floor hard, gasping. "Elias!" Lenora started toward him. "Stay!" The leader's hand shot up, stopping her mid-step. A crackle of static cut through the air. One of the masked men pressed a finger to his ear, listening. Then came a voice Lenora recognized instantly, crisp, authoritative, unbothered. Caleb's voice. "Make it look clean." Her blood turned to ice. The masked man nodded once, murmuring confirmation into his radio. Then his eyes returned to Lenora, and she understood. If Lenora survived this, she would carry the blame forever. Not as a victim, as the insider, the accomplice who helped stage a robbery, who accessed Elias's files, who betrayed the family that trusted her. The photo, the delayed cameras, the locked panic room, every piece of evidence pointed to her, and Caleb Elias's own head of security was orchestrating it. "No outcome is clean anymore," the leader said, almost regretful. "You see that now, don't you?" Lenora's mind raced. If she fought, they'd overpower her and take the boys anyway, or worse, make it look like she'd harmed them. If she cooperated, she became the story they needed, the desperate maid who sold out her employer. But if she ran, if she took the twins and disappeared before the frame solidified, she'd become a fugitive, a kidnapper, hunted, guilty in the eyes of everyone who mattered. No path led to her innocence. Grace often arrives looking like disaster, her grandmother used to say during the hardest seasons. You won't recognize it as mercy until it's already remade you. Lenora looked at Oren and Vaughn, both watching her with expressions too knowing for their age. Then at Elias, barely conscious, betrayed by his own people. Then at the men who'd been sent to erase her credibility, her freedom, her name. She straightened slowly. "I'll go with you," she said, her voice low and clear. "But we do it my way." The leader raised an eyebrow. "Your way? You want this clean? Then we make it loud." Her eyes locked onto his. "We make it loud enough that people ask questions you can't answer." Lenora chose a path that would save the boys but destroy her version of the story. And there was no going back. Lenora didn't wait for permission. She scooped up Oren and Vaughn in one swift motion, turning toward the east wall, where heavy drapes concealed what most people had long forgotten, a narrow service corridor built decades ago. When the estate employed twice as many staff, she'd discovered it her second week, during late-night walks, when sleep wouldn't come. Years of being invisible had taught her to notice the spaces no one else saw. She slipped behind the drapes, fumbling for the recessed panel. Her fingers found the latch. It gave with a soft click. The door opened into darkness. "Wait!" The leader's voice sharpened behind her, but she was already inside, pulling the panel shut. The corridor was tight, unlit, smelling of dust and old wood. She moved quickly, one hand trailing the wall. The boys pressed against her chest. Oren whimpered once. Lenora exhaled slowly, deliberately long and controlled. Oren's breathing shifted, matching hers. Then, Vaughn's. Both boys stayed silent, copying her rhythm, their small bodies rising and falling in sync with hers. She navigated by memory 20 paces forward, left turn, down 3 shallow steps. The corridor fed into the staff wing, then out to the rear garden access near the greenhouse. Behind her, muffled voices shouted. Footsteps scattered in the wrong direction. She kept moving. By the time she emerged into the cold night air, sirens were wailing in the distance. Lenora crouched behind the stone planter near the greenhouse entrance, clutching the twins, her lungs burning. The masked men appeared briefly at the terrace doors, silhouettes against the light. Then, just as suddenly, they vanished. No struggle, no dramatic confrontation. They retreated before a clean capture, slipping away like shadows that had never been corporeal to begin with. Emergency vehicles flooded the driveway. Minutes later, police, paramedics, private security. But their arrival felt fragmented, delayed, compromised. Questions overlapped, responses contradicted. Caleb stood near the entrance, directing officers with calm authority, his face a mask of concern. Lenora watched from the garden, still hidden, still holding the boys. An officer found her eventually, led her inside, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Asked her questions, she answered carefully, precisely, offering only what could be verified. Elias was loaded onto a stretcher, conscious now but disoriented. His eyes found hers as they wheeled him past. Something in his expression had changed, sharpened, perhaps, or humbled. Everyone survived, but nothing felt resolved. The twins were checked by paramedics unharmed, miraculously calm. Lenora sat in the kitchen while officers took her statement, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't asked for and wouldn't drink. Through the window, she watched Caleb speaking into his phone, his back to the house. Still in control, still untouchable. The evidence against her was still there, the photo, the access logs, the delayed footage. The frame hadn't collapsed. It had only been interrupted. Lenora closed her eyes, feeling the twins' weight still pressed against her chest even though they'd been taken to a guest room upstairs. This wasn't chance, she thought, her grandmother's voice echoing in her mind. This wasn't skill. This felt like mercy. Later, when the house had quieted and most of the responders had left, Elias appeared in the kitchen doorway. His face was pale, an IV still taped to his arm from the paramedic's brief treatment. He looked at her for a long moment. "You knew," he said quietly, "before any of us did." Lenora met his gaze but said nothing. The billionaire realized protection had come from the person he'd overlooked, and that realization sat between them heavy, uncomfortable, and impossible to ignore. The official story was clean, efficient, forgettable. Attempted home invasion. Suspects fled. No casualties. Investigation ongoing. It made the local news for exactly one cycle before being buried beneath fresher tragedies. But inside the Hardwick estate, the private truth moved like a ghost through empty hallways. Evidence had been erased. Security logs altered. Blame redirected toward a coordinated external threat that conveniently left no traceable leads. Caleb Morrow resigned 3 days later, citing personal reasons. He was gone before anyone could ask the right questions. The photograph of Lenora vanished from evidence logs. The panic room code was reset. The delayed camera feeds were explained away as a software glitch, now resolved. Everything had been scrubbed, almost. Elias sat in his study, the same room where he'd dismissed Lenora's unease as nerves, the same desk where he'd received that cryptic text. His lawyers had presented him with options, carefully worded, strategically vague. He could pursue the truth, expose the rot within his own security infrastructure, drag Caleb and whoever else was involved into the light, or he could accept the silence, protect his sons from becoming part of a public scandal. Let the story die quietly, the way powerful people always did. He had to choose between exposure and protecting his son's future. The decision had already made itself. He signed the settlement agreements, approved the non-disclosure terms, watched his legal team carry away the last fragments of accountability. And when it was done, he sat alone in the dark, finally understanding the cost of the silence he once preferred. Lenora had been questioned 4 times in 6 days. Detectives who smiled too politely. Officers who took notes they didn't believe. Each session ended the same way. "Thank you for your cooperation. We'll be in touch." She was doubted, quietly marked. Watched, but not removed. Elias had insisted she stay. The twins needed continuity, he'd said. Stability. Someone they trusted. She wondered if guilt had played a role in that decision. Or fear. Or some fragile recognition that she'd been right when everyone else had been complicit. It didn't matter. She stayed because Orrin and Vaughn needed her. Tonight, the house was silent again. Different, though. Heavier. Lenora sat in the rocking chair beside the twins' cribs, her eyes tracing the familiar shadows on the ceiling. Orrin slept on his side, one hand curled beneath his cheek. Vaughn lay on his back, breathing slow and even. They slept peacefully. She did not. Every creak of the floorboards sent her pulse spiking. Every shift of wind against the windows made her hands tighten on the armrests. She'd stopped trusting locks, stopped trusting cameras, stopped trusting anyone whose loyalty could be purchased. But she hadn't stopped watching. Through the baby monitor, she heard Elias moving somewhere downstairs. Footsteps in the great room. A chair scraping across marble. Then, silence. He sat alone, understanding the cost. She understood it too. The cost of staying. The cost of knowing. The cost of being the person no one believed until it was almost too late. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with someone staying watch. Lenora leaned back in the chair, her gaze never leaving the twins. Her grandmother's voice drifted through her memory one last time, soft and certain. Not every miracle makes noise, some simply teach us how to endure. The night pressed against the windows, and Lenora kept watch.